So if you guys want the best decks to climb with, you came to the right place, and I'm going to not only be giving you guys the decks, but general mulligans for the deck and things you can do to make the decks cheaper if you don't have all the dust. Just to note, Mancrick is a card you get for free with the Battle Pass right at level 1. So I'm going to just assume you all have this. So anyway, Face Hunter is your general Smork deck, and the general mulligans are Interbred Initiate. You also want Adorable Infestation, Demon Companion, Imprisoned Felmaw, Kolker Packrunner, and Mancrick. Those are the cards you generally want to hard mulligan for, because that's how you get your early game tempo going. If you don't have the Rinling's Rifle and Barrack, you could potentially run another Knife Vendor and a Horde Operative to stop some secrets in some other classes. You could tech in maybe a weapon removal like an Acidic Swamp Ooze, or a Silence to get over some taunts with an Ironbeak Owl. The point is there are a couple of things that you could do, and if you do take that route, I would suggest a tech card to help you into certain matchups. Probably, like I said, a Silence or the Horde Operative to stop their secrets, because Paladin is very strong right now and is probably the most or the second most played class in the game. So anyway, moving on to the next one. Speaking of Paladin, we have Secret Paladin, and this is up here on the list because unlike Secret Libram Paladin, which lost the Penflingers, this deck only really got the Sword of the Fallen nerfed, and it still has the same great tempo Paladin used to have. It's a little bit less consistent because you can't draw as many secrets quickly with the Sword of the Fallen, but you still get to draw 2. Playing this turn 2 still curves really well into any of these really strong 3-drops, 2 of which have secret synergy, the Crossroads Gossiper and the Northwatch Commander. And this deck is a little bit slower because it doesn't have as many secrets. You can't dominate as hard early. So you took out a couple of secrets. You took out 1 Galloping, and I took out 1, what's it called, Reckoning, and I put in 2 Hammers of Naru to give me a little bit better of a late game for my closer card. And it's been performing extremely well. I think I went 5-1 with this deck, and yeah, I think this deck is really strong. For those of you who want to play this on a budget, if you don't have Kazakus, you could take him out for another secret like Galloping Savior. It wouldn't be that bad. And in terms of mulligans, first day of school, Knight of Anointment, Righteous Protector, Crab Rider, Hand of Adal, Sword of the Fallen. And if you have early game, you can keep a 3-drop. But if you don't, I would actually get rid of some of these 3-drops and look for something else early. The only card I think I would keep regardless is the Northwatch Commander, because you have so many secrets in your deck, you'll probably get this off, and he's a 3-4 that draws you a card, so he's fine. But other than that, the other cards are kind of iffy. You don't want to keep secrets or any of the other spells, though. Next deck is Control Priest, and although Priest, if you look at the win rate overall, Priest is still the lowest win rate class in the game, although it has gone up a little bit. Despite that, I think this deck is really good. Like, the stats don't tell the whole story, right? There are 2 main Priest decks in the meta right now. Miracle Priest, which is good. It's not in the video, but it's still playable. And Control Priest. But they're both quite difficult to play. Rely a lot on being very efficient with your spells, your removal, and making a lot of decisions every single turn. And it requires you to get to the late game, which is not always possible if you don't play the game super effectively. So it's a very high skill cap deck, which lowers the win rate. But if you want a deck that is going to be good almost 100% of the time, if you learn how to play it, this is the deck for you. It does lose really hard to Tickatus Warlock, but that's it. That's the only deck that this deck really loses to super hard. And let's just jump into things you could do to make it cheaper. Obviously, Blademaster Samuro, if you spent money on the Battle Pass, you'll get him for free as a diamond, but you probably didn't because you want to play on a budget. Same with Zarilla, Solmir, Cthulhu, and Yogg. I think Cthulhu is pretty important, but if you don't want to run any of the other legendaries, you got 1, 2, 3, 4 cards you could take out. I would ideally put in another Desperate Prayer for some extra healing into aggro, an Acidic Swamp Ooze, a Horde Operative to stop, the secrets, wherever it is, Horde Operative right here, and a Silence Ironbeak Owl. If you don't want to run another Desperate Measure or Acidic Swamp Ooze because you think one of those is enough, you can throw in another Venomous Scorpid as well for some extra resource generation and a good 3-drop, and that would be perfectly fine. But overall, this deck has everything you could possibly need. Good late game, good control early, decent amount of draw, and if you learn how to play it well, it's going to be one of the best decks in the expansion, in post-nerf. So I had a hard time deciding between like mid-range and Deathrattle Demon Hunter because they actually play really similarly, if you think about it. They both want to play tempo, not super strong turn 1, but really pick up the pace turn 2 and especially 3. Rely on some really strong mid-game cards to win you the game, although I think Deathrattle Demon Hunter has some better mid-range cards like the Dark Spear Berserker and the Renowned Performer, which, in my opinion, are just a little bit stronger than some of the stuff mid-range has. And then you curve into the late game where you have Skull Gul'dan, Death Speaker Blackthorn, and the Illidari Inquisitor to close out games. And because of the fact that I think it has a slightly better late game and a slightly better mid game, but a slightly worse early game, I think that this deck is better because it is better at 2 stages of the game, which I think is perfectly fine. Like, you could run mid-range too. Mid-range is actually fine, but it's just a little bit iffy. If you don't have the Death Speaker Blackthorn, I would actually consider maybe going with mid-range Demon Hunter. But if you still want to play this deck because you like Death Rattles, you could take this out and put in another Wand Maker to give yourself a little bit of extra early game. And Talon and Mankrik you both got for free, so it's fine. None of these other cards are really that big of a problem. And let's jump into the next one. Okay, so I didn't think this deck was going to be that strong, but after playing it a little bit, I was like, wow, this deck actually is. And the reason is because of 2 main things. 1, the fact that the cards or the decks that were strong in the meta beat Rush Warrior. Like, no Minion Mage, what are you going to run into? And Paladin was just absolutely bonkers. But now, not only are those decks nerfed, but the decks that are coming into the meta aren't as good into Rush Warrior. Like Face Hunter, not only do you have armor to gain some life, but you also have exclusively rush minions, which means you're able to kill off almost all of the hunter's minions, so they can't actually do that much damage to you. You got some taunt minions, some good weapons, and overall you're chilling. Another reason why this deck is good, just in general, is because it goes really well into the mid and late game. If you can get the conditioning to give all of your minions +2/+2 in your hand, there isn't that much removal that can deal with giant minions like that over and over and over again. And when you have cards like Athletic Studies, Stage Dive, Corsair Cache, Outrider's Axe, and Ringmaster Watley in order to draw you cards and thin your deck and generate resources, with all that being taken into consideration, you're always going to have minions in your hand to pump with conditioning. And then you're going to just play tempo, and after you hit turn 5 or 6, you basically just take over the game. Last thing, you actually have an OTK, kind of, with ETC. You basically play, where is it? You play the Playmaker, you play ETC, then you play Bumper Car, you trade in twice, then you play 3 1/1 rush minions, which get copied because of Playmaker, and that is a total for 16 damage, all of which is really cool. In terms of mulligans, you'd go with Athletic Studies, Stage Dive, Bumper Car, Corsair Cache, Crab Rider, Parade Leader, Rikara, Warmaul Challenger, Venomous Scorpion. Basically anything 3 cost or lower, other than maybe like ETC and Conditioning, are viable keeps. On to the next one, and the last one, except for one honorable mention. So there are a couple of good Druid decks out there right now, and I would say that this one is probably the best. And the reason why I think this one's the best is because the meta has slowed down a little bit, minus Face Hunter, obviously. But if you're not playing against Face Hunter, you basically just curve into some ramp, then play all of your big things, and people can't respond to it. The control decks, there isn't enough removal in the game to wipe a Guardian Animal's turn, a Primordial Protector turn, and 4 Carnival Clown turns if you play Yasharaj as well. Not to mention Strongmen, which you could put out at any point in the game if you make them free. So that being said, it is a little bit slow and susceptible to pure aggro. So if Face Hunter actually dominates and is played like 50% of the time or whatever, this deck might struggle, but I don't think that'll be the case. I think the meta will slow down a little bit as people start to learn how to counter the Face Hunter deck, because again, aggro decks usually do well right after nerfs and expansions because they're the easiest to play. So once the meta probably slows down a little bit, I think this deck will actually do really well because you'll be able to get to your Wild Growth and Overgrowth pretty consistently, and then your big cards. You might disagree with me on this one. This one's more of a personal preference because I played it, went 5-1, and absolutely dumpstered everything. The only deck I lost to being a no minion mage that basically just had all of the burn in their hand, had 2 Incanter's Flows, and there's nothing I could really do. But moving on to the last deck, it's one that I thought would be higher, and you probably already know what it is because I haven't talked about it yet, but it's one I thought would be higher on this list, but it's surprisingly not as strong as I thought it was going to be. And that deck is Tickatus Warlock. I thought Tickatus Warlock was going to be absolutely bonkers, But this deck has a really bad matchup into Face Hunter because of the fact that they do so much damage and you do damage to yourself, and unless you draw soul fragments to heal you up consistently, you're most likely going to lose the matchup. So it's not impossible, but the most prominent matchup being Hunter dumpsters this deck, and there aren't that many control decks out there right now. There are a lot of like mid-range decks that have good value, good board development, like Rush Warrior, like Paladin, even Hunter to some extent, Druid, which develops giant wide boards, which this deck can't punish the same way as control decks. So until the meta slows down and becomes very control focused, I think this deck might be a little bit weak, but I will admit there are some things you could do to make the deck a little bit better. You could probably take out an Ogremancer for another Venomous Scorpid to increase the speed of your deck a little bit. In fact, I'm probably going to do that now, actually. Or you could end up running an Acidic Swampooze if you run into a lot of weapon-based matchups, but I haven't seen many of those yet, so be a little bit careful. You could also run the Horde Operative, because that can deal with spells, which will be really nice. But that's about it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you do, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. This is basically everything that I would play. And I know I didn't give you budget options for the last couple of things, but for this one, I don't know. You could probably run it without Yashiraj. You could probably run it without Sociologist, barely, although Sociologist is super important. And maybe just run Horde Operative, Acidic Swampooze, and stuff like that to counter the meta. Also, I have a fully built Control Warlock already made. If you want to watch that video, it's already on my channel. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you do, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.